Guitar tips, just the tips, just for you. Guitar tips. Hello and welcome to another episode of Guitar Tips Pro. My name is Adam Levy and this is my video blog series, which you support, and I appreciate that very much. This week I wanted to do something a little different, a little fun, hopefully. Do any of you still buy records? And I mean records. I do, and near where I live in Los Angeles, there's a really cool record shop called Atomic Records. And I was there recently, and I was on my way to the, check out, and I had the records that I was planning to buy, and then I saw this orphaned record sitting in a little pile on the front counter. Looked like somebody was going to buy it and change their mind, and I saw it, and this was the cover, and I was like, wow, I have to have this. I don't know that much about Louis Bonfa. I've heard his name over the years. I know he's a composer and guitarist. Most famously, he wrote the theme for Black Orpheus, which you may know if you play jazz and or own a real book. Anyway, the other reason I wanted to get this is of course this crazy chord he's playing on the cover. And I was kind of curious, like, what is this chord? It wasn't one that was familiar to me, and so I posted a picture of this album cover on my Instagram feed a few weeks ago when I bought the record on Guitar Tips Pro. If you're not following, you can go to Instagram and go to Guitar Tips Pro. Anyway, and I asked people what they thought the chord was, and people had some really good ideas, and I think we figured out what it is. But what I wanted to talk about today is how you do that detective work, because you are going to see people play chords on record covers and wherever you see people play chords, and you might wonder, what is that chord? How can I figure out what it is and how I might use it? Or you might just stumble upon something, as you're just exploring on the fretboard. Or you might be playing a transcription of something where the chords are not named. It's just tabbed out, so you know where to put your fingers, but you're really not sure what it is or how you might use it later on. So I wanted to talk about 3 ways that you might be able to identify a mystery chord. So here's the chord that we're starting with. It's not an easy one here. This is I'm on the middle 4 strings, and I'm playing 3rd fret, 4th fret, 1st fret, and 6th fret, or almost the 6th fret there. Yeah, wow. So I would call that C, G flat, A flat, and F. Of course, you could also think of this as F sharp and G sharp. But as we get into analyzing things, I think it'll be, because we've already got F natural, it'll be less confusing, to me anyway, if we just have one kind of F, and then, so this is not an F sharp, but it's a G flat. So we're not trying to use the same letter name twice if we can help it. So that's what we're dealing with. C, G flat, A flat, and F, okay? So here's 3 ways that you might figure out what the chord is, and then maybe what to do with it, which is what makes it useful. So the first thing I would do is I would just see if one of the 4 notes might be the root. So in other words, is it an F? I'll go from top to bottom now. Is it an F something? Is it an A flat something? Is it a G flat something? Is it a C something? So let's start with F. If it's an F something, then we've got the 5th of the chord down here, and we've got the minor 3rd over here, A flat. So it's kind of a I'll refinger it here just for a moment. I'll put the A flat. I moved it from here to here. So it's an F minor triad, kind of spread out in the second inversion, but it is an F minor triad. So that's interesting. But then you've got this G flat, and that means it's probably not an F minor chord, because it's very rare that you would have like F minor flat 9. That's what the G flat is. So this would be a more conventional F minor flat 9. Doesn't come up that much. So it's probably not an F minor, but it could be F7 with this note acting not as the minor third, but as the sharp 9. And then this is the flat 9. So we get more like this kind of sound. That's sharp 9 and flat 9. So it could be F7, sharp 9, flat 9, in which case it would probably go to B flat minor. And that, right, because it's some kind of dominant chord with these tensions. It's probably the 5 chord of B flat minor, or it could be B flat major. Let's see what that sounds like. That's cool too. So it could be some kind of F dominant chord with sharp 9 and flat 9. And interestingly, it doesn't have the things that we usually want to have as foundational notes in any kind of chord, and a dominant chord in particular. It doesn't have the third or the seventh. So there's nothing really dominant sounding about this. It has root 5, flat 9, sharp 9. So it's really stark and I think kind of cool and modern sounding. Might be more useful if you played it up an octave. But if it sounds good to you down here, then that's cool too. So what if it's an A flat something? Well, if it's an A flat something, then we've got the major third, so we're looking good that it could be a major chord or a dominant chord. And we've got G flat, so that's a pretty good indicator that it's an A flat dominant chord. Now here we do have the things that would be missing from the F kind of chord. We've got root 3 and flat 7, so it's very much an A flat 7 chord. And then this F on top, you can think of it as the 6 or the 13. Just depends on how you think of stuff like that. So it's like basically this chord, just kind of with the notes shuffled around. And this chord might be familiar to you as an A flat dominant 13 chord. So this is basically that. Just instead of having the A flat on the bottom, we've got it over here, and instead of having the C here, we've got it down here. So it's this with just the notes shuffled around. So that could be a pretty useful chord. That's going to want to go to D flat, or maybe to D flat minor, or could go to B flat minor. Could be maybe a dominant 2 chord in the key of G flat. Okay, so that's pretty useful chord. What if it's a G flat something? Well, let's see, we've got the major 7, so it could be some kind of G flat major 7. It's got the 2, this would be G flat major 7, but we've got the 2 where you'd expect to have 3, and we've got the where you'd expect to have 5. Like, you see that this is a G flat triad, and here's the major, makes it major 7. So, but what we've got in our Louis Bonfa chord would make it G flat major 7 flat 5, and substituting 2 for 3. So G flat major 7, add 9, flat 5. And if you were really going to use it in this range, in the chord symbol say over C. So G flat major 9, no third, over flat 5 over C. It's a handful of a name, but it could be a useful chord as kind of just a one chord. So maybe we have a progression that's wow, I wish I had one more finger. Kind of a Lydian sound. Can't quite get all of that. Pretty. Maybe useful. That's just a nice open Lydian major sound. It could be maybe not something that you'd resolve to at the end of a chain of like 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, but something if you were going to open it up and just have like a section that you jam over, that could be a sound that would be good for, you know, improvising over, rather than it doesn't feel settled, feels open, at least to my ears. And then the last note it could that we're going to consider as a possible root is C. And it's going to be tough to think of this as a C chord because we've got sus4, flat 5, flat 6, and that's just not something that comes up very much. C, sus4, flat 5, flat 6. But it could be it could be just an unusual chord that we don't know and haven't used much, and you could find something to do with it. But to my ears, it feels like it could be kind of a twist on a minor 7 flat 5 kind of sound. So it's not uncommon if you're playing C minor 7 flat 5. It's not uncommon to put the 4 on top. Right? So and also it's not uncommon to use the flat 6 as a color note on a minor 7 flat 5. So here's C minor 7 flat 6 in place of flat 5. Here's minor 7 flat 5 and then putting the flat 6 on top. So it could be like a 2 chord in B flat minor. So there you go. F7 flat 9, sharp 9, but with no third or flat 7. A flat straight up dominant 7 with a 13. G flat kind of Lydian sound, or C minor 7 flat 5, but subbing the 4 for 3 and the flat 6 for 5. Those would be how you could look at each one of those notes as a root. So that's our first way of exploring a mystery chord and trying to make sense of it. The second way that I would explore a mystery chord is to look for some telltale intervals. There's a couple of intervals in particular that when they show up in a chord voicing, they tend to be operating in a specific function. So, for example, if we think of this as a C chord and we've got this sus4, that's not common. I mean, sus4 chords aren't uncommon, but a much more common kind of interval in chords is a perfect fifth, where we've got the C above the F. So this could be some kind of inversion of an F something. I would lean towards saying it's probably some kind of F chord, just by nature of the fact that we've got this perfect fifth. And whatever this other stuff is, I would justify it against this perfect fifth, even though the perfect fifth is kind of upside down here. It's this sound. Right, here's the perfect fifth and the flat 9 and the sharp 9. We'll play it up an octave so you can hear a different sort of sound of it, but same notes. So that's one kind of telltale interval, is a perfect fifth. When you've got a perfect fifth, there's a good chance that the lower note of the perfect fifth, in this case that's F, is the root of the chord, is the overall root of the chord. And as we saw earlier, this does work as a kind of F chord. So look for perfect fifths in mystery chords and see if that helps you identify them. The other kind of telltale interval that we see is tritones. A tritone looks like this. It's 3 whole steps. It's 2 notes that are 3 whole steps apart. So C, D, E, F sharp, or G flat could be. And that's part of our chord here. Now, when you have a tritone in your chord voicing, there's a pretty good chance that those 2 notes are the third and flat 7 of a dominant chord. Because that sound is that weird interval. It sounds kind of weird by itself, but it's an important part of how dominant chords work and how they resolve. They have this tension, and then each note moves by half step, and then you've got your resolve. In this case, yeah, it's pretty low down, but you get the idea, right? I'll do it up an octave. So that's when you see a tritone in a chord, ask yourself, could it be the third and flat 7 of a dominant? So in this case, yes, C and G flat are the third and flat 7 of the A flat. But as you may know, if you've studied jazz harmony, any tritone actually belongs to 2 different dominant chords, and then those relationships change a little bit. So instead of being the third and the flat 7, they might be the flat 7 and third, because those 2 notes also belong to D7. I'll move them up here, and you can see that more clearly. So that's G flat and C. I just moved the C up an octave, and it could be part of a D7 chord. So listen to that. So that tritone could be part of D going to G, or it could be, that tritone could be part of A flat going to D flat. Either way, things are resolving by half step. You have a tense interval going to a very sweet interval. So if it's D7, that changes things a little bit. That's now flat 5, A flat, and F is the sharp 9. We'll call it E sharp. So D7, sharp 9, flat 5. This would be maybe a more familiar voicing of that. But can you hear? Cool. So that could be useful. And again, maybe you take it up an octave to make it something more. There we go. That's pretty cool as a D7 chord. So that's the second way of exploring chords, is looking for these telltale intervals, perfect fifths, or tritones, and then look at the tritone from both ways. There's one more approach, and it's the simplest of the 3. When I stumble across a mystery chord like this and I don't recognize it, one thing I'll often do is move it to another string set, because sometimes if you move it to another string set, you might find that it suddenly looks more familiar. In this case, not so much. That's not any more of a known chord to me than the other one was. It's easier to play because it's not such a knuckle buster, but it still doesn't look like anything I know. But if I move it up an octave and onto this string set, strings 1, 2, 3, 4, same pitches, C, G flat, A flat, F, suddenly it looks a lot more familiar to me. I can see it in a couple of ways. It looks related to this A flat 7 chord that I know, where I'm playing root 3 flat 7 and then the root again. And it's just, I'm leaving off this bottom root and putting this 6 or 13 on top. So it could be related to that. It could also be related to this A flat 9 chord with a 13 that I know, which also has these two notes in it. You see what I mean? It's starting to I can relate it to things that I know. And then we saw in a minute or two ago how it could also be a D7 chord with a sharp 9 and flat 5, and I can certainly see the D7 aspect here, right? So just by moving it up an octave and onto a different string set, the chord seems to be something that I can visually relate to. And again, you know, you're going to want to try to put it into chord progression. So if it's an A flat chord, it's probably going to go back to D flat, because that's what dominant chords do. They want to go from 5 to 1. I'm just making stuff up as I go along here. But you see what I did? I'm just kind of messing around in the key of D flat. And I use it as a resolve chord. If it's a weird D7 chord, it's probably going to want to go to G minor. Here I've gone from G minor, I don't know, felt like going to E half diminished. But remember how we saw this could be a C half diminished or C minor 7 flat 5, so I'll try to do the same thing here. So G minor, E half diminished with the 4 and the flat 6, and then E flat major 7, D7, G minor. So yeah, when you have a chord and it's new and you're trying to use it, put it into little cadences, into a 5-1 or a 2-5-1 or a 1-6-2-5-1, or whatever kind of progressions would be useful to you. Try to just use it wherever you can in as many different ways as your imagination can lead you to. There's one other method that I sometimes will use for further explorations with mystery chords, and that is to try to figure out if it belongs to a scale that I know. So this is kind of a bonus thing. The first three things that I mentioned would be the main detective work, and now this is a little bit like, you know, when the other detectives have gone home and you just want to stay on the case a little longer and pull an all-nighter, you might want to look at the chord this way. So this chord has 4 pitches in it. It's got C, G flat, A flat, and F. And when I think about what scales those 4 notes might belong to, the 3 that come to mind for me, and there may well be others, but the 3 that come easily to mind for me are D flat major. So this could be just, you know, we're in the key of D flat. Right. And the reason that it's important to know what scale it comes from is, it helps put it in some kind of musical context, so it's not just a chord floating around in space, but it also lets you think about what other notes you might want to put on it. Like now I'm adding this B flat, and that's okay because it's in the scale. I could try putting, doesn't sound great with the D flat on top, but I could put it E flat on top, and that sounds good. Or I could just put the E flat here and leave the F, leave the F behind and use E flat. So I can do different kind of not alterations in the sense of like alter dominant chords, but just variations on this chord by using other notes from the scale. I could also think that this might be some relation to D flat, some relation to, C, it's already a C, but maybe it's some kind of a B flat chord, or some kind of A flat or G chord or F. In other words, what happens if you put any of the notes from the D flat scale as a potential bass note? This voicing might be useful, especially if you take it up an octave. That's the D flat underneath it, that's the C underneath it, and you can put B flat under it, and so on. So another scale that it could be part of E flat melodic minor. So I would do the same thing. Maybe I'd get out a looper pedal and just sustain the chord and experiment with different bass notes, or a freeze pedal you could use if you have one of those, and get the chord ringing or sustaining somehow, and then experiment with different bass notes from the scale underneath it, or different melodic ideas above it. So D flat major, E flat melodic minor. It also could be part of the C diminished scale, the 8-note diminished scale. That's C, D, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, A, B, C, or F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C. You hear that? So it could be part of that. And again, I would do the same thing. I'd find some way to sustain this chord and then play melodic stuff above it, bass notes below it, and see what I could come up with. Maybe try to write a little vamp to play over, or write a whole tune if I could do it, or a section of a tune. So then it really becomes something that you're much more familiar with. If it's just a note in your notebook, oh, discovered a cool new chord today, then that's cool, that's useful. But you make it more useful by composing with it. Composing could be anything from a full-blown tune to just a little 2-chord vamp that you have as part of a tune. So there you have it. Mystery, I don't want to say mystery solved, because it's still kind of a mysterious chord, but mystery explored, and mystery made utile, I hope. So there you go. Let me know if you have questions about this. I like to think about this stuff a lot, and I'm curious to know if you spend this kind of time at home thinking about chords in these sorts of ways. I'd be really curious to know. So until the next tip, I'm Adam Levy here in Los Angeles at Guitar Tips Pro headquarters. Stay tuned and take good care.